All right, the new Vallejo Game Color, Vallejo Game Color, Vallejo Express Color, and then a few other things. This is what I've been able to get my hands on. They're going to work out the supply issues soon, I'm sure. But this was ordering from two different places, Michigan Toy Soldier Company or mishtoy.com, and also from Miniature Market. And most of the time when you order from them, when you're trying to order the game color, at least here in the U.S., right now it's pretty much out of stock, out of stock, out of stock, out of stock. So I got some of it is stuff that, okay, I knew I would use, like this khaki and this bone white, this very dark blue, this kind of space wolf gray kind of thing. I wanted to try their white because I'm not real happy with some of the white paints that I've had, and I want to try those. Some of them I got because they were just available. A couple of them that I ordered, unfortunately, some of the ones that I wanted, not that I didn't want any of them, but some of the ones that I really wanted, after I ordered them, they ran out of stock. Ordering them, and sent me a note and said, "Hey, we're sorry. These things are just going like crazy. We'll get these out in the mail to you as soon as I can." And I don't get upset at that. I know that happens, so I'm not gonna fret about it. I wrote them back and told them, "Hey, no worries. Get it to me when you can." I had to send myself an email to remind myself which colors I had bought, because I could just see me going back, 6 weeks from now going, "Oh yeah, I need this color," and buying it. And next thing you know, I've got a couple of them. But what I'm going to do here, this is the stowage for the Rogel Dorn battle tank. And I had, before all of this, before I had any of these, I had planned on using probably a combination of contrast paint and traditional paints to paint these up. So I'm still going to do that. Just do some of the elements with some of the colors that I have. I probably won't get to all of them, but I want to use some of these and just see how they work. Now, I will say from the get-go, these are Vallejo products. I don't expect there to be any surprises with any of them in terms of that they're not going to be of good quality, very useful. It's kind of like, and I've said this before about other things and about Vallejo. It's kind of like in the old days of business. There used to be commercials where they said nobody got fired for buying IBM. That's pretty much how I feel about these. They're always solid products. I think Vallejo is, not that this would ever happen, but I think Vallejo is the only company that if they ever came to me and said, "We'll sponsor you for all of your modeling products, but you have to use our stuff exclusively," I think I'd be willing to go, yeah, I can do that. Wouldn't do it for Citadel. Wouldn't do it for AK. Wouldn't do it for, certainly not for Ammo of MiG or Army Paint or anything like that. They are the only company that I can think of, except for their brushes. Their brushes are good, but these Rosemary & Co. brushes that I've been using, way better. So anyway, I don't expect these to be any kind of problems. And I've seen other people do reviews of these. So I don't expect, and they've all been good. Although sometimes, and this is just an aside, this is just opinion, and I would only share it here on Patreon because I know there's only gonna be like 4 of you who watch the video anyway. Come on, I see the stats. Don't get mad at me. I see the stats. There's so many people that when they review these, any kind of product, it's like they have to act like, okay, I'm looking for some kind of controversy. I'm looking for something that I got to find something really good. I got to find several medium things, and I got to find something that I have to. And I remember when they first started letting people use the 2 thin coats paints, one creator, I won't mention him. If you've seen it, you'll know who it is. He was talking about the paints were good and all of this, but then he went on and on about just being very, very disappointed that they didn't have more skin tones other than Caucasian skin tones, and just how that was just, I'm like, that first run of paint had 54 colors. You know, what do you, anyway, and then I've seen others that, just apologize for things or try and like I don't hold any, make any bones about it. The Vallejo speed, or not the Vallejo, the Army Painter speed paints, when they came out, there were so many people who, oddly enough, happened to have already been pretty much affiliated with Army Painter anyway, who were saying, no, this reactivation issue is it's intended, it's a good feature, it's this, it's that, and the other. And I'm sitting there going, if Citadel would have released their contrast paints when they did in 2019 or 2018, whenever it was, and they would have reactivated, people would have brutalized Games Workshop. And I'm not an apologist for Games Workshop. I'm not a fanboy of Games Workshop. I like their stuff. They're a company. That's it. I get it. I'm in business myself. So some of the people that I've seen try and do so-called reviews of this, they follow that formula of, I've got to find something really bad, something really good, and then a few things in the middle, and not sound like I'm really liking any of it. Come on, let's be realistic. If you've used Vallejo, you know they're good products. So I don't expect these to be any different. I'm going to show you how they work for me, and I'm just going to talk about, what I think of them, and not try to, blow smoke or anything like that. Now, the first one I'm going to try is this Game Color Metallic called Chainmail. And what I'm going to do with each of these, I've got off camera here, I've got a Vortex mixer, the little thing you put on, it goes brrr. Like that, brrr, that's how it sounds. But when I use my Vortex mixer, I tend to do it on the bottom for a little bit, and then I flip it over and do it on the lid, so I get it going both ways. And then I shake it up fairly good. These are sealed with this red seal. I've only opened up one of them, and it was just to try and figure out what the heck it was, and it's this rust one. We'll talk about it later. But I'm going to go ahead and use this chainmail first, because there's some things I want to paint with a metallic color, and then I may put some paints over it. So all I'm going to do throughout this, and I'll mention throughout it what I'm going to be doing. I'll let you know if I'm using it straight from the bottle or if I'm thinning it. And if I'm thinning it, I'm only going to thin it with water, because they made a point of saying all of these worked just fine when thinned with water, including their express color paints. So I'm gonna test that. Now, one thing I am noticing is they've made these bottles clear, which is good. You hear the seal breaking there, which is good because then you can actually see the color. But they feel much thinner than Vallejo's older bottles. You can see the dropper. It's a little different in its look, but it feels it's a much thinner plastic than their previous bottles. So you have to be careful. I just noticed this. You have to be careful when you're kind of opening it. The tendency is to squeeze it really hard. So I had to grab it up here where there's more rigidity, stiffness up here at the top, so that I didn't want to have so much pressure on the sides when I was opening it that it would do that and just pop out like that. So let me clean that off on my shirt, which my wife hates, but she's come to accept, and she still loves me. I'll put that back on and get it sealed on there. Now, I put this on my palette, and it's fairly thin. You could certainly thin it with water, but I'm going to start off without any water. I'm just going to do it right out of the pot and just see how it goes on. It goes on, I mean, it covers well, and I'm blobbing it on there, but a lot of times when I'm using metallics, or if I'm painting something like this where it's all going to be one color and I'm not trying to be super precise about it, I'll put a blob of paint on and then almost use that as a palette on the piece itself, and just, as you can see, I'm just spreading it out across everything. And you'll notice that I'm using, or you may not have noticed, I'm using just an older beat up brush. This is one from just a cheap brush from Hobby Lobby. When I'm using metallics, I tend to use cheaper brushes because they can be kind of rough on paintbrushes, and we want to be nice and kind to our paintbrushes, don't we? But anyway, I'm just going to paint that metallic, and I like the color. It goes on there really nice. I like the color. I like the way it flows on there. Even in this unthinned state, you could use that very easily. So that worked pretty good. And in one coat, looks like it's completely covered. So I'll just set that aside to dry. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in, let me add a drop of water up here. I have to be careful with this dropper bottle because it makes really big drops of water. So sometimes I have to be careful not to put too much into the paint. So I'm just going to grab some right there and just integrate that in. And that's just thinning it down a little. And I'm mainly doing that to pardon my lack of preparation. But I'm going to get this antenna here and I'm going to put it in this clamp and I'm going to paint it. So you see it's very inky in its application, I mean in its flow with that water, but it's covering really good. Not quite as good. It's pulling away from some areas like you would expect if you thinned it down, but that wasn't much thinning at all. And it's flowing really, really nice. Doesn't look grainy, although on a small scale like this, it's kind of hard to see, but just in the first, you're literally seeing, folks, you're literally seeing my first use of this, and I'm really, really liking that. So I'll just set that there to dry. Now let me get another couple of clamps. Hang on. All right, I've got this gun on clamps, and I'm just going to go ahead. I'm not going to leave it all silver, but I'm going to go ahead and base coat everything silver, because one of the things I want to do on this gun is I want to use some of that express color over it. And for the purposes that I'm going to be using it, it's going to be good to have a metallic undercoat. So I'll go ahead and do that. The color I would, and I guess this is why they probably called it chainmail. I think, I may be wrong, Nikki, you can tell me for sure, I bet. I think under the old Citadel paint system, before the current one we have now, that's why it's the old one. Anyway, what is now lead belcher, I think was called chainmail, I think. I may be wrong on that, but it's very similar in color to lead belcher, which is one of my all-time favorite paints. But wow, I was really impressed with the Two Thin Coats paint that's the equivalent of that, and God, I think I like this better. And it's drying. This is something I heard Richard Gray talking about. It's drying really matte. I like my paints to be matte. If I want them glossy and shiny, I would prefer to do something to it myself to make it look that way. This is doing it pretty much on its own. So let me paint this other piece of cable here, and I'm just going to paint this on the tape right there. And I may go back up once the video's done and do some touch-ups on this, because this is as much for demonstration as it is for production. So, but this, if the rest of their metallics, now it's hard to make that statement because the rest of their metallics may completely just stink. I doubt it, but it's hard to make a judgment on one color. But if the others perform like this, and everything I've seen says they do, I will be very happy to the next time I need any metallic colors to replace what I have with these, because these are really, really nice. I just really like those. Yeah, it's still shiny looking, but it's got a very matte, dull appearance, which I think for this type of application is perfect. So, let me get this. Yeah, this was the guy that I wanted to see how he was going to look. The machine gun. Remember that Jimi Hendrix song, Machine Gun? Machine Gun. That was a Jimi Hendrix. No, I won't even try it. I shouldn't even try it. It's a Machine Gun with Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies after he and Jimi Hendrix Experience parted ways. So, and I've fired a machine gun that's kind of like this, 50 cal. So I know it from a couple of different angles. Firing a 50 cal is an experience that if you've never had it, I mean, if you're having to fire for real, it's, you know, serious business. But if you're just on the range and you're firing it, oh my gosh, that's a lot of fun. Although I had some friends who were 50 cal gunners in combat, and they were like, yeah, it's still kind of fun. Scary because of the purposes, but they're like, every time you light that thing up, man, you know, everybody knows who you are and where you're at. And they're either gunning for you or trying to get the heck out of your way. Anyway, 50 cal is a powerful weapon. But talking about paints here, so I'm just getting this on. And I know I keep going in and out of focus. I'm sorry. It's the afternoon. In the afternoons, I tend to have more energy, tend to be a little more excitable, as you've probably been able to tell. But, all right, we'll set that aside and let it dry. All right, now I'm going to take these barrels that go on the back, and I'm going to paint those with this angel green. Now, this angel green, I'm assuming, is meant to be for dark angels, kind of a base color for those. Richard Gray recently did a video painting a dark angel with this as kind of the basis of the paint. And one thing I am seeing with these paints, I understand from a quality control standpoint why they put that cap on it, but with my arthritis, that makes it really hard to open, hard to get a grip on it. So I shook it up. You see, it's still not entirely mixed. I'm going to need to put an agitator in that and make sure that it gets shook. But unlike the metallic, this paint is much thicker. When you shake the bottle, you don't really hear it. Maybe a little, but you don't hear it moving a lot. So it's thicker, but I'm still going to put some of that on there and just see how that works. Now for this, I'm going to go with, this is a natural brush. This is a Rosemary & Co. Pure Sable Series 99 size 4. And I'm just going to paint that on there. And even though it's unthinned, it's going on pretty good. No complaints there as far as the coverage. And it's fairly smooth. It's thicker than I would want to use from a production standpoint on an entire model, but for testing it out, it's pretty good. Definitely needs some water, so let me put some in there just to help it flow just a little better. And I also want to see, one of the things I look at when I'm looking at when I thin paints with water is, does it start breaking up the pigments over time? Oh yeah, just that little bit of water. Man, that flows so nice now. Flows so nice. If you ever have questions about how to get your paints thinned properly, there's a creator that goes by the name Brushstroke77. His name is James Collard. He recently did a video on thinning your paints, and he approached it from a very data-driven standpoint, and it is the absolute best video on thinning your paints that I've ever seen. So I highly commend that to you. Even if you're comfortable with thinning your paints, the way he approaches it and the way he explains it, it really does a good job of kind of giving you some visual clues to look for. Because his paint, if you've ever watched his videos, his paint work is extremely smooth, extremely good. He's going to be, unfortunately, he's one of those guys that his work is super good, but because it's not this flashy, silly fanboy kind of stuff, he's probably never going to be as big as he could be. But I hope he continues doing it the way he's doing it, rather than fall prey to silliness, because his work is extremely helpful. And it's quite good. So this color, I like this. I mean, it's a green color. As I see the actual color itself, I may actually end up painting over this because I don't know this is the color that I want for the barrels on the back of the tank. or I may use some kind of washes over it or something. So this probably isn't the greatest color for this purpose, but the paint itself, it's really good. Now I do notice that there's just a little separation in the palette here, and that's not a problem. That happens in most paints, quite honestly. As they sit in your palette, especially when you're using a dry palette, they'll tend to separate a little bit. Especially the more water you put in. But the amount of separation I'm seeing here is, I think, in my mind, quite acceptable for the amount of water that I put in, and for just typical of paints. I tend to see it in grays and greens more. I don't know why, but I like this. I like this, and it's drying. It's you can see it's going to need 2 coats, but it's drying very matte, just like Richard Gray talked about, which again is my preference. So I'm really happy with how this paint is performing, and I think this would look great on a dark angel. I think when you add some shadows and highlights and stuff like this would be a really good color for that. So I'm liking this first use of the actual Game Color paint itself. I'm quite liking what I'm seeing with it. Now I'm going to use this Nuclear Yellow Express Color paint. The way I'm going to be using this, and I don't know if the paint is going to be appropriate for this, but I'm going to put it on anyway. 1, to see how it works, but 2, to see if it works this way. There is a Citadel contrast paint called Nasdrag Yellow that, if you put it over metallics, looks very, depending on the shadows and highlights you do and a few other things you do in terms of its presentation, can look like gold or like bronze. So I'm going to put this on here, and I'm going to see how does it go on compared to the Citadel paints that I've used for the same purpose. And I'll have to say that so far goes on very nice. Has about the same consistency as contrast paint. This seems to be thinner than the Nasdrag Yellow. That's one of the things, though, that in promoting the product they've mentioned, is that they tried to get them, in terms of consistency of thickness, they tried to be more consistent than contrast paints. If you've used contrast paints, you know that there's some that you'll put on that, I mean, they're just really, really translucent. And others you put on, it's like you're just using paint. It's so thick that it's difficult to even get it to go on there. This is fairly thin, and it slides off of the open areas of the surface just like it's supposed to, and seems to be going down in the recesses, but it does a much better job. It's almost glaze-like in the way it's working, and I mean, that's what I wanted. I wanted something that's kind of goldish, kind of bronzish. You can't say that without sounding like a very bad Sean Connery impersonation, but I like that. That's good. So I'm quite happy with that, and I'll let this dry a little bit. Let me put it up on here. I'll let this dry a little bit and come back later and put a second coat on there. But I'm fairly confident of Vallejo's claims in this product because they had Angel Giraldez helping them with it, and Juan Hidalgo. And if you've watched Juan Hidalgo stuff, you know that guy, he's kind of brought using contrast paints to a whole new level. So if Juan Hidalgo was happy with them, I figure I'm probably going to be happy with them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the little spring coil down here at the base of this antenna with this. I just think that looks kind of cool to have it kind of looking kind of brashish. There's Sean Connery again. But looking, and if anybody's a really huge Sean Connery fan, I apologize. I'm a huge Sean Connery fan, but yeah, that works pretty good. In fact, I wonder, let me just put some in here on these shell casings. I'll have to go back and touch it up later, but that's to be expected. And I am applying this with a natural hairbrush on this. It's not synthetic, not that it probably matters, but this is a Rosemary & Co. Series 99, which is easier to get here in the U.S., and I've been working with those, and I am really liking them. It's the first natural hairbrush that I've felt confident to just go ahead and use on a daily basis. One, because they work extremely well, and two, because you're not paying $20 a dadgum brush, you don't feel like that, you have to be so precious with it. So let me look at this. Well, this looks like it's pretty much dried. It's much more matte than Citadel paints, Citadel contrast paints, which is good. I've always thought they were a little too shiny. These seem to be just matte, like the Game Color paints, the new Game Color paints. So I'm putting this on same way that I did before. And wow, okay, that's pretty awesome. I like that. I like that. Gee, I wish I'd have done this publicly now so Vallejo would hear me talking them up and go, hey, maybe we send John some paints. But that's never going to happen, but that's okay. That's okay. At least if nobody's sponsoring me, I can never have to feel bad about selling out to the man. Now here's one that I'm a little puzzled in its use. This is the only one that I'd opened prior to this video because I had tried it out on something else. And when I tried it out, I was working on something else. I think it was a little stompy. It was the tank treads. And I needed to get something done, so I thought, well, I don't have time to experiment with this. But it's the rust. Now, what I can't tell is if this is designed to be, because they say it's a special effects paint. So I'm just going to use it right out of the bottle. I don't know if it's supposed to be like, I think it's the Citadel paint typhus corrosion or something like that. It's kind of a rust color that has some grain to it. I'm not sure what this is because as it goes on, it's just kind of a thin brown. It's a good rust color. Definitely a good basis for rust. I don't know if it's intended to be thinned and then, sorry if I'm getting off camera, intended to be thinned and then used as a wash. If it's designed to be an undercoat, I don't see any texture to it. Of course, I'm looking at this from about a foot away without my Optivisor, so I just may not be able to see it. Hang on, let me do that real quick, and then let me come back and tell you what I see. Well, for now, I'm thinking it must be me. I put it on, and it dries to a rusty color, but there's nothing. It's almost contrast paintish in its look here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it into a kind of a wash and just add some water in. One, this will test how this works with water. I'm just going to apply it to the rest of the cable and give that a chance to dry. See how that looks. Now, this isn't always the case because there have been a few products from Vallejo that, they're not bad. They're not something I use very often. There have been a few over the years that I would get it and I'm like, okay, I totally don't see the point of this. And then later on, they would do a video that showed how to use it. And I would go, oh, okay. I didn't get that. That looks pretty good. As far as making it look rusty, but there's no texture to it. I thought, well, maybe when I put it on there, maybe it'll do kind of the dirty down rust thing and change color. No, it didn't do that. It just kind of dried very matte, very brown. So I will say for now, and maybe in a future Patreon video, I'll have more information and can come back and say a little more about it. But I will say for now, I'm going to put it down to me not understanding how to use it. Maybe this is how to use it, and it's just, it just is what it is. But for now, I'll say it's me, not it. and I'll try to figure out how this is supposed to be used, because they have some other rust products, rust weathering products that are meant to be more like washes. There's some that have texture to them, maybe I didn't stir it up well enough. Maybe there's stuff on the bottom that I completely missed. There's a whole bunch of texture on the bottom. I don't know, but I'll do what I can to figure out. I'm a patron for Juan Hidalgo, so he answers Patreon messages. So maybe I'll message him and say, "Hey, how do I use this?" And hopefully he'll give me an answer. So we'll see. Now here's one that's fairly new for me. This is the Game Color ink, and this is the white ink. I don't recall that I've ever used white ink before. I don't think I have. I'm just going to apply it like I would anything else. Now, inks usually go on very translucent, and this appears to be the case here. Usually, inks are more productive in terms of using them to thin paints, using them to airbrush on for glazing, using them for glaze coats or something like this. But sometimes when you're working with a new product, it's helpful just to paint it on and see, okay, what does it do? And I'm seeing here that this works pretty much like a glaze. And although in the areas that I'm not trying to prevent it from pooling, it seems to be settling the resources. So it's kind of like acting like, I guess you'd say, a reverse wash. Let me just add a little bit of water to it and see what happens with that. I'm expecting it'll just basically be more of the same, just thinner. So I doubt there will be anything earth-shattering there. Let me just get a bunch of that on there and just bleh that on there like that, and then let it dry. Well, I think this proves my theory, or not my theory, but what I said earlier, that this is probably better for glazing, for thinning, for airbrushing, which is all things I plan to at some point in the future try with it. But I've just never used white ink before, and I hear people quite often talking about how useful it is. I don't know that I've ever seen them just have anybody paint it on like that. Although I suppose, like I said, I mean, you see how thin that is there with water. You can make use of that as a glaze. So again, this is one that I'll put aside until later and just kind of notch it up to me being not all that experienced about what I'm doing, and not anything to do with the product. So moving on to the next one. All right, now here's another express color. This is Templar white, and this is kind of a gray with just a hint of blue, and I think I'm going to use this on this blanket just to see how it works. And yeah, that pretty much applies like I would expect. It goes on very much like the other one. It's much thinner in terms of opacity than similar stuff that I've used from Citadel, or from Citadel. But it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's doing a very good job of doing what it's supposed to do, which is settle into the recesses. It's supposed to tint the surface, but settle into the recesses so that and pull away from the high points so that you get some highlighting and some shade and some color tint. Now, because it's going over gray, it's going to be very hard to see much of a difference, but I like that. I can tell where this would really, really shine is if I had primed this in a darker color, say a dark gray, and then done some dry brushing over it to build in even more of the highlights. But if you wanted, say, a gray blanket very quickly, this looks like it would work really good. So let me hit it with a hairdryer, give it a second coat, and take a look at it from that perspective. All right, after a brief session with my hairdryer, I'll go ahead and hit it with another coat. And yeah, this is good stuff. This is exactly, and I like this because if it holds true what their marketing says, that their products are very consistent in how they apply, this will be good because it's much more predictable. I like Citadel contrast paints. I really do. But one thing I have not liked about them, and I mentioned this a little earlier, is that sometimes they can be very inconsistent. And it's not insurmountable. I mean, you find a test piece and you put it on, and once you've figured it out, you figured it out. But just from a practicality standpoint, and for me, what's really important is a recommendation standpoint. Because like if I say I really like Citadel contrast paints, and nobody's ever used anything like that, and they don't approach it from a very data-driven standpoint, they'll put one on and they'll go, maybe they get one of the thicker ones and they go, wait, this doesn't work at all. This stuff is trash. Or they'll get one of the really thin ones and go, wait a minute, this is no more than a wash. Or maybe they'll get one that's behaving like they would expect and they go, oh, this stuff's great. And then they get one that does one of the other things and they go, wait a minute, this is garbage. I'm always, someone who says you try it, you see what it does. You would, if it's worth using, you adjust it to get what you want. If it can't be adjusted, you find another product. If the rest of these, because so far these two have been very consistent in the way they apply. If they're all that consistent, it's going to make recommendations much easier because that's something that's very important to me. If I recommend a product, I want to know, okay, people are going to have kind of an expected they're going to get what they're expecting from this because it's very important that I know that that's going to happen. So far I'm liking it. And when I dried it with a hairdryer, it dried very, very, very matte. So again, that's nice because I feel like that I personally prefer a matte finish on most things. Now I know you can make it matte at the end, but there again, that's when it comes to recommendations. Sometimes people will email me and they say, well, you recommended this product, but I put it on, it's real glossy. I don't want it glossy. What do I do? And I'm like, okay, add a matte coat to it. It's not hard. But at the same time, I know a lot of people approach it from the standpoint of put it on, should work, period. Nothing else needs to be done. So I always want to be cognizant of that, aware of that. So my wife says I need to stop using big words. I'm really happy with these, with those and how they're applying. All right, now I'm going to use this bone white Game Color paint to paint this wooden crate right here. Now I'll put some other stuff over it later, but usually when I'm painting wood, I like to start with a very light, warm color. Now, one thing I will say, when I opened this up, I shook it up like I did the others when I tried to get the paint to come out. Nothing came out. I took a toothpick, and stuck down into it. It appeared that some of the paint had dried up in the neck and had just clogged it up. Because when I squeezed it out, you can see kind of a thing along here, kind of like we'll just say something solid and brown came out first. Just a little short bit of it. And then the paint flowed normally. Now, that is interesting because I have seen that happen on multiple manufacturers with this type of paint, this color of paint, that it must be more difficult to produce. I know Too Thin Coats, the paint that I got from them that was similar to this color was very, very thick and had some issues with it. So this must be a challenging color to work with. But once that initial clogging came through and I unclogged it with the toothpick, didn't have any problems. And I just thinned it down with water, fairly thin. And I'm just going to overbrush this completely. I'm not going to worry about being neat on any of it, so that, because I can go back in and repaint all of those other details later. I just want to get that on there and get all the surfaces covered as the basis for some wood. And again, this is going on. I mean, this is exactly what you would expect from Vallejo paints. It goes on there good. Honestly, it's not much different from Iraqi sand, which is a Vallejo Game Color paint. Like I've said, Vallejo's a known quantity. I mean, they know how to make paints. Apparently, model paint is only a small line of what they do. They're not really a hobby-focused company in terms of our hobby, but they make paints that are used in Spain and in Europe that are, for a lot of different applications. Apparently, this is not the main their main reason for existence, but rather is just something. Well, as long as we got all this ink and we got all these mediums and we got all this paint, let's paint this stuff. Let's put this stuff together and sell it to these modelers because they seem to buy it. So I think that's actually good for modelers in a way. While they're not as familiar with modelers' needs overall, they do appeal to modelers. They are extremely familiar with making paint. So they've got the ability, I think, to do much more in terms of research and development and seeing what works across a wide spectrum of paints. And so I think that's what makes them such a good company to do that. So let me give that just a minute to dry, and I'll move on. All right, now I'm going to use this grunge brown. I like this color. It's a reddish brown, very, very desaturated rust-looking color. Now, what I want to do with this is I actually want to use this for that wood, and I'm going to thin it way, way down, very much like a wash. And because one of the things that Angel Hiraldes talked about in or the English voice that they use for Angel Hiraldes. I wish I could understand the Spanish. I used to speak Spanish when I was in the Army, but it's been too many years and I just can't keep up with it because I'd like to hear him in his original words and not the translated words, because there is sometimes a difference. But I'm just going to use this to go right back over this and just see how that works. And yeah, because if I remember right, he was basically talking about you can make any of these into a wash. You can make any paint into a wash, but sometimes paints break apart. They don't work well when you use them this way. So I just wanted to see, how does it do for making it a wood type look. Let me pull off the excess there. All I'm doing is taking it when I go off camera. I'm cleaning my brush off, again, on my shirt. And then because it looks like rust, let me just put it over this and let that dry and see how that looks for making that cable look rusty. So see how that ends up. All right, now I'm going to test the dead white paint. And I'm going to do something a little different. This is a little figure that I had primed, and I had started painting just as kind of a sidebar thing. Never have gotten on with it. But I'm just going to take some of this dead white. Now, this is right out of the bottle. This is not thinned at all, so it's very thick. It's like the others, the other colors that I've used. It's fairly thick. I'm just going to put this on, spread this over. Now, the reason I chose this is over a black primer. So that lets me see, okay, how's the opacity on this white paint? Because sometimes white paint can be very, very difficult to work with, because some that I have used, some that you may have used, covers nothing, and or is very can be very grainy or something like that. Looking at you, Citadel. So let's see how this dries in its unthinned form, and just give it one coat, and I'll let that dry. And then let me clean off my brush, and while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to put a little bit of water over here. I'm going to be running out of space on my palette here before long. If you're wondering why I'm not using a wet palette, usually I never work long enough to, it takes so much time to set up the wet palette that it's not always worth it. I use them from time to time, but it's just not something that I make a priority. But anyway, let me put some of this on there. And I've thinned it. That was probably, if I had to guess, 50-50 with water. So let's put it on the shield here and see how that looks. Okay, that's going on much smoother. The other application was not as smooth, but it was more opaque. This is much smoother. I imagine it's going to dry a little more translucent than it goes on, but that's actually not bad in terms of coverage for putting it over black. Let me hit that with a hair dryer, and we'll see how that looks. Hang on a second. Now on the back, the coverage isn't bad. It dried smoother than it went on. It went on looking kind of grainy. Up here where I really piled it on, it looks pretty good. On the shield there, it did dry more translucent than I expected. But quite honestly, with most white paints, that's what I would expect anyway. So let me just hit it with a second coat now that that's dry, and see how it looks. And again, very rarely would you paint white directly over black primer. I wouldn't. Not unless it was just in a very small area that I knew I could just kind of blob it on and it would go. But this is better than Citadel. It's about like Vallejo Model Color white, which I would expect. So normally when I use white, I use Vallejo Model Color. I would have no problem switching to this. There are other brands that I've been told, I've seen different creators use, that they say they cover much better. But quite often ordering one bottle of a more obscure brand of paint is just not cost effective. And when I paint it, like I assume that when I paint it over this gray primer, then 2 coats is all it's going to take to reach full opacity. So this is not an extensive experiment, but in terms of my use of white paint, this is exactly what I would expect paint to do. Yeah, that's good. So I'm liking the white in this initial. And keep in mind, I mean, this has been 5 minutes at most that I've used that white, not even that, used this white paint, but it's behaving like I would expect Vallejo white paint to behave. And the final thing I'm going to look at is one of their fluorescent paints. This is their blue fluorescent paint. The reason I chose blue is I've got some other Vallejo fluorescents that worked really good, but when I had ordered those, I was not able to get any of their blue fluorescent paint. And I got some blue fluorescent paint from AK Interactive, some of their 3rd generation paints. And while it is a bright blue, it's not fluorescent. I wasn't real impressed with it. So I thought, let's just use this one and see how it looks. Now I'll paint this over the white. Let me just blob this on and see how it looks, how we end up looking with this fluorescent paint. It's very thin. When I shook it up, it's almost like one of their inks. So I'm probably going to have to do multiple coats of this, which is actually kind of good, because if you're wanting to get a fluorescent effect, and no, this is not an apologizing for it. If you're trying to get a fluorescent effect, sometimes building it up in layers is exactly what you want, because you want more of the white to shine through in some areas and more of it to be more of the blue. So let me test that out and see how that works. All right, I dried it with the hair dryer. Going back over it again. Yeah, it builds up. The only thing I'm not sure about is it dries very matte, And for fluorescent paints, I would prefer they be, although I can put a gloss on them, so that's not a problem. And like I said, the blue that I've worked with in the past, I've not been real impressed with, the blue fluorescent. So maybe it's just a difficult color, because the other fluorescents I have from Vallejo, the greens, the reds, the yellows, they work really, really well. This is meh. This is okay. It's better than the AK stuff. But now keep in mind, I haven't tried airbrushing it. And a lot of times airbrushing fluorescence is where they really shine. So I'll say that, again, reserve that for some future commentary. But right now, I'll just call it the jury's still out on it. It's acting like other blue fluorescents I've used act. Not that sandbags are ever fluorescent, unless a private who we won't name takes his chem light, breaks it open, cuts it up, and pours it all over the sandbag, and then the sandbag glows for the rest of the night, and the drill sergeant's mad at him. But we won't mention that. Anyway, that's the fluorescent, so kind of a meh on that. Now, I know this is going really long, and I started to say I'll apologize for that. No, I wanted to, this is real time. This is doing it. This is my thoughts while I do it. So hopefully it's helpful. But my thoughts so far, exactly what I started off with. This is Vallejo. It's going to work. It's good. I don't see anything different in terms of the overall quality of the product that I don't always expect to see from Vallejo. The colors are nice. Look at this. Look at this turquoise. That's just gorgeous. Back when I was building aircraft, that would have been perfect for the insides of Soviet aircraft. They used that kind of turquoise look. Been perfect for it. Some of these others, this grunge brown is perfect for rust look. The bone white, I really like that. The dead white, I was impressed with that. The express colors, the couple that I used, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They give a nice look when put over metallics, which is one of the things I wanted to see. Worked good going over this blanket like that. Dried matte, that's something that I really like about all of these that I've used, is a dry matte. I have been missing that. All of the paints that I used to use when I built aircraft, Tamiya and stuff like that, they always dried so matte. And I really liked that. So I'm glad that these are very matte. I would use them for that alone, because otherwise the quality seems to be good. Again, I'm not going to call this a definitive test. It just simply confirms what I've always said about Vallejo paints. Nobody gets fired for using Vallejo paints. They're very good. I really like the metallic. I'm going to be trying out more of the metallics. I'm not going to ditch what I have. People, I don't know why, but people always ask me this. So, are you going to get rid of all your other paints? No, I'm not getting rid of all my other paints. I got too much money invested in it. But I can see that as I need new paints, I will, for some colors, will be replacing them with the Game Color paints. Certainly grays and whites and stuff like that. I'll probably always use, unless they change it, I'll probably always use, say, like the reds from Citadel. Citadel's reds are very, very good. I really like those. Whereas Vallejo blacks and grays, more of the military colors, they just have really good coverage. They look really good. And of course, these are more affordable. These are half the cost of Vallejo or of Citadel. They're going to be less than the Duncan Rhodes paints when you get them individually. These at the vendors that I got them from were about 15 to 20 cents less than Army Painter, and the quality of these is way beyond Army Painter. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not calling this a definitive test, but in an initial just kind of how long is this video? It's going to be roughly about an hour or so. And basically an hour to, well, I guess with editing, it was actually an hour and a half. But with basically 90 minutes of usage, it just proves what I expected from these, that they're good. They're good. So I would say if you've used Vallejo colors in the past, and whether it's model color, game color, any of that, if you've used those in the past and you like them, that when it comes time to replace the colors that you have, you need a bottle of this or a bottle of that, consider these Game Color paints. because they are, and especially like if you're using Citadel and you're wanting to save a little money, and you want to try, say, even the reds. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got this Nocturnal Red, is I wanted to see, okay, how does a really dark red from Vallejo work compared to Citadel? I haven't tested that one, but I will get to it. These are good paints. I'm really excited about the Express Color paints. I want to try more of those. I want to make sure to work more of those into my processes to see how they work. I'm going to need to do further testing and research on this special effects. I got this rust and this galvanic corrosion. Like I said, for that rust, I'm kind of putting it off on, I'm not sure I know how to use it correctly. I may not be using it correctly. It may do something that I don't understand it because I'm not doing it right. Same way with the ink. I don't know that I'm just painting it on is not using an ink how generally it's supposed to be used. The fluorescent blue, if I airbrush it on, it may be a completely different story. So I'll keep all of that in mind. Please don't take anything I say as kind of final word, because I don't mean it that way. But these are good things, and I'm going to continue using them. And as I learn more of them, I will bring them up in future videos, either in YouTube or here on Patreon. So I hope in some way that this has been helpful to letting you know, if you've been wondering, should I give them a try? Yeah, give them a try. They're good stuff. I like them. I'm looking forward to, I wish I could have gotten more colors associated with a project, so I could have done kind of like the Duncan Rhodes paints and go, okay, let me paint the whole project with these colors. But right now over here in the U.S., they're so hard to come by that I just had to kind of get what I could get. So I don't know how I would exactly make up painting a model with the selection I have now. So anyway, hope this has been helpful. Sorry it went a little long, but thank you for your patience. Thank you for your support and your encouragement. You're a blessing to me and my family, and I know I've said that before, but I absolutely mean it. So thank you very much for that, and I will just close as I always want to do and tell you, in this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. All right. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.